You're standing in a cave. It's roughly 40,000 years ago. The sun went down hours ago. There is no moon tonight. You cannot see your hand. You cannot see the walls. You've slept in this cave for years. You cannot see anything at all. Somewhere out there in darkness, there is an animal 4 times your weight. It moves faster than you. It has navigated this terrain without light. Your job tonight is to hunt it, not tomorrow morning when sun comes up. Tonight, right now, in the dark. Most people hear that and think they must have carried fire. They must have held the torches. Problem solved. Next question. Sure, fire existed. Early humans controlled fire for hundreds of thousands of years, but that explanation misses entirely. A torch in a dense forest is not a flashlight. It's a moving signal flare. It announces your position to every animal. Within half a mile, it destroys your night vision outside its reach. It creates flickering shadows. Shadows confuse your depth perception. It spooks prey before you get close. Fire is extraordinary for warmth, for cooking, for keeping predators at a distance. As a precision hunting tool in the dark, it is unreliable or counterproductive. The torch answer sounds right. Until you think about it for 10 seconds. Once you let go of it, a more interesting question opens up. How did they actually do it? Because they did do it. That much is not in dispute. The archaeological record is unambiguous. We find evidence of hunting activity at sites with no natural light access, cave systems hundreds of feet underground, beyond any reach of surface light. Kill sites in dense forest corridors. Canopy cover blocked moonlight almost entirely. Seasonal records suggest active hunting during months with shortest days and longest nights. Darkness was a constant condition of life, not an obstacle to work around. Our ancestors were not waiting for dawn. They were out there, moving, tracking, killing, surviving. In conditions most modern humans find unbearable, psychologically unbearable before physical danger. Here's the thing nobody tells you. About darkness and the human body, we treat poor night vision as fixed, a hard biological limit. Humans can't see in the dark. Early humans must have compensated with tools or fire or something external. But that framing is backwards. It assumes the visual system is the whole story. It assumes hunting is primarily visual. It assumes ancestors had modern sensory baselines, just without electricity. None of those assumptions hold up when you look at the evidence. The human brain in complete darkness does not simply downgrade, it reorganizes, auditory processing sharpens measurably, spatial memory becomes primary navigation. In a way it never has to with vision. Smell moves to the foreground. Modern humans ignore smell with vision. The whole sensory hierarchy shifts. In a person hunting specific terrain, in all seasons and light conditions, that reorganization is not a scramble. It's a practiced skill. A state they knew how to enter, how to maintain, how to use. What early humans did in the dark was not a workaround. It was not a compromise. It was a completely different mode of operating. We have largely lost the ability to access it, not because our brains changed, but because we stopped needing it. And once you understand that, the real question isn't how they survived hunting in darkness. The real question is what exactly they were capable of doing in it. That's where this gets genuinely unsettling. The first thing that goes when the light disappears is confidence, not capability. Confidence. Modern humans step into real darkness and immediately feel helpless because we have spent our entire lives in environments engineered to eliminate darkness entirely. Streetlights, phone screens, refrigerator lights that click on at 3 a.m. We have not experienced genuine darkness in any sustained way. Most of us, ever. So we assume helplessness is the correct response. We assume that what we feel in the dark is what there is to feel. But that assumption is about culture, not biology. And early humans had a very different culture, one where darkness was not an emergency, it was Tuesday. Start with hearing. The human auditory system is genuinely extraordinary, and almost nobody talks about it because vision is so dominant in daily modern life that we forget the other systems are even running. In complete darkness, the brain does not simply wait for light to return. It shifts resources. Neurological studies of people in prolonged low or no light environments show measurable increases in auditory cortex activity within minutes. The brain is not being polite about it. It is actively reallocating processing power toward the channel that is still delivering useful information. And what that system can do when it is actually being used at full capacity is remarkable. Experienced hunters operating in low light can identify animal species by the sound of movement through specific vegetation, not as a party trick, as a reliable, practiced skill. The rhythm of the hooves on dry ground versus soft earth. The particular crack of a branch under a specific weight. The difference between a deer moving casually and a deer that has sensed something and is deciding whether to run. These are not subtle distinctions to someone who has been listening to that landscape for decades. They are as legible as words on a page are to you right now. The information is there, you just have to have trained the system that receives it. Then there is smell. Modern humans are deeply condescending about our own sense of smell. We rank ourselves somewhere below dogs and above rocks and leave it at that. But the research tells a more complicated story. Human olfactory capability, when attention is actually directed toward it, is far more sensitive than we give it credit for. Studies have shown that humans can track scent trails across open ground with accuracy that genuinely surprised the researchers who designed the experiments. We can distinguish hundreds of thousands of distinct odors. What we cannot do, or rarely do, is pay attention to that information in a world where visual input is overwhelming it every second of the day. Remove the visual input, and the olfactory system does not suddenly become more powerful. It simply finally gets heard. Early hunters operating in darkness were not working with a degraded sensory toolkit. They were working with a fully engaged one. But here is the piece that matters most and gets talked about least. Spatial memory, the brain's internal three-dimensional map of a known environment. In a world with light, spatial memory is a useful backup system. A convenience. You know roughly where the furniture is, which is helpful when you get up at night, but mostly you just look at things and navigate visually in real time. Take the light away permanently, and spatial memory becomes your primary operating system, and the human brain builds extraordinarily detailed spatial maps of environments it inhabits repeatedly. Archaeologists and cognitive scientists studying hunter-gatherer cognition have documented spatial recall abilities in people who live close to traditional ways that are, by modern standardized testing metrics, almost incomprehensible. Detailed mental maps of terrain covering hundreds of square miles. Recall of specific features, water sources, animal trails, seasonal vegetation patterns, accurate enough to navigate by in complete darkness across ground they have not physically crossed in months. This was not a special talent. This was a baseline skill developed through years of living in direct relationship with a specific landscape in all conditions, including darkness. The terrain was not an unknown. It was a memorized space that happened to have the lights off. And moving through a memorized space in darkness is a fundamentally different experience than moving through an unknown one. It is not frightening. It is not disorienting. It is, for someone trained in it, almost meditative. A kind of fluency with the physical world that we have traded away so gradually we did not notice it leaving. So when early humans moved out into the dark to hunt, they were not stumbling blind into uncertainty. They were stepping into a familiar space with fully activated senses and years of accumulated knowledge about exactly what that space sounded like, smelled like, and felt like underfoot when the world they knew went quiet and dark. That is not survival against the odds. That is expertise. Here is something the archaeology forces you to confront, whether you are ready for it or not. Darkness was not the enemy, in a significant number of documented hunting contexts. From the prehistoric record, darkness was the plan, not the obstacle to work around, the actual strategic advantage being deliberately exploited. And once you sit with that idea long enough, it completely reframes everything you thought you knew. About how early humans operated, think about the animals being hunted, large herbivores, the primary prey of Paleolithic hunters. Across most of the world, operate on schedules, driven by predator pressure and temperature. In hot climates, many species are dramatically more active at night, precisely because the large diurnal predators are less effective after dark, the ones that hunt by sight in open terrain. Aurochs, the wild ancestor of modern cattle, were crepuscular to nocturnal. In their most active grazing patterns, certain deer species moved primarily at dusk and through the night, mammoths based on isotopic analysis of their remains, and comparison with modern elephant behavior, likely shifted significant portions of their feeding activity into cooler nighttime hours during the warmer seasons. The prey was out at night, which means the hunters who could operate at night had access to animals that daytime hunters simply did not. Water sources were the key. This is where prehistoric hunting strategy and darkness intersect, in ways that the archaeological record makes almost impossible to dismiss. Animals have to drink. Every large animal, regardless of how cautious or fast or dangerous, has to come to water on a regular schedule, and they do it at predictable times. Often dawn and dusk, often through the night, because those are the hours when the risk calculation favors movement. A hunter who knows the water sources in his territory, who has memorized the approach paths, who understands which direction the wind runs at which hour of the night, does not need to chase anything. He needs to be in the right place before the animal arrives, and remain still enough and quiet enough and downwind enough that the animal never knows he is there until it is too late. Ambush hunting at water sources in low light conditions is one of the oldest and most consistently documented hunting strategies in the human archaeological record, across continents, across cultures, across tens of thousands of years of evidence. The darkness was not incidental to this strategy, it was load-bearing. Then there are the tools, and this is where the physical evidence gets genuinely specific. Researchers analyzing spear tips and projectile points from Paleolithic sites have identified design features that only make practical sense in the context of close-range, low-visibility hunting. Certain point geometries are optimized not for maximum penetration at distance, but for maximum damage from short-range thrusts, the kind of strike you make when you are close enough to touch the animal. When there is no room for error and no time for a second attempt, the hafting methods on certain tools show evidence of being designed for one-handed use, leaving the other hand free, which matters when you are moving through dense cover in darkness and need that hand on a tree trunk or a rock face to orient yourself spatially. These are not general-purpose tools. They are tools designed by people who had thought very carefully about what it actually means to kill something large. In conditions where you cannot fully see it, there's also the evidence from cave sites themselves. This one genuinely stops researchers cold when they first encounter it. Deep cave systems, the ones with the famous Paleolithic paintings, the ones at Lascaux and Chauvet in Altamira, were not accessible by natural light, not the sections where the paintings are. Getting to those chambers required moving through complete darkness for extended periods, navigating complex underground passages with nothing but carried fire. That fire was limited and directionally unhelpful. The people who made those paintings knew how to move through absolute darkness with confidence and purpose. That skill did not exist in isolation. It was part of a broader competence with darkness. This competence extended to everything they did in the world above ground as well. And there is one more piece that almost never makes it into popular accounts. Sound as an active hunting tool, not just a passive information channel. Researchers studying traditional hunter-gatherer communities maintained night hunting practices into the modern era. They documented deliberate use of sound to manipulate animal behavior in darkness. Specific calls used to freeze prey in place, triggering the instinctive stillness response predators exploit. Percussion techniques drove animals toward waiting hunters positioned along known movement corridors. Coordinated sound signals between hunters spread across terrain they cannot see each other across, communicating position, movement, and timing without words in a language of clicks, taps, and animal calls. This language developed over generations. This was not improvisation, this was doctrine. Accumulated tactical knowledge passed down through communities refining these techniques across more generations than recorded history contains. The picture that emerges is not of desperate people stumbling through darkness, hoping for the best. It is of hunters who understood darkness as a dimension of their environment, the same way they understood terrain, weather, or season, something to be read and worked with, and when conditions were right, actively sought out. Because in the dark, with the right knowledge and skills, the balance of power between a human and a large animal shifted in ways daylight simply did not allow. Here's the part that should bother you a little. Everything described in the last 3 blocks, the sensory reorganization, the spatial memory, the tactical use of darkness, none of it required a different brain than the one sitting in your skull right now. The Paleolithic hunters moving through absolute darkness toward a water source at 2 a.m. were not a different species running different cognitive hardware. They They were us. Fully modern Homo sapiens with identical neurological architecture, identical sensory systems, identical capacity for fear and calculation and spatial reasoning. The brain did not change, the demands placed on it did. That distinction matters more than it might seem at first. We have a habit, a very modern and very comfortable habit, of treating our ancestors as an earlier and lesser version of ourselves. Smarter than animals, sure, but not quite as capable as we are now. Not as sophisticated, working with cruder tools in every sense of the word. And that framing is wrong in ways that are almost embarrassing when you look directly at the evidence. The hunter who could navigate 3 miles of unmapped forest in complete darkness, locate a water source by sound and memory, position himself downwind of an animal approach path he had memorized seasons ago, and make a kill in conditions where he could not fully see his target, that person was not operating at a lower cognitive level than you. In several specific and measurable ways, he was operating at a higher one. Not because he was smarter, but because he had been trained by a life that demanded it. The neuroscience here is not subtle. Cognitive systems that are exercised develop. Ones that are not, atrophy is too strong a word, but they recede. They become background processes that never get called to the foreground. The human auditory system does not degrade in modern environments. It simply never gets asked to do its real work. The spatial memory systems that can build and hold a detailed three-dimensional map of hundreds of square miles of terrain are still in there, in every human brain alive today, waiting for the kind of sustained environmental demand that would activate them fully. We are not less capable than our ancestors in these areas. We are less practiced. That is a very different problem. And unlike a hardware limitation, it is theoretically reversible. There are places in the world where you can still see fragments of this. Communities in the Kalahari, in the forests of the Congo Basin, in parts of the Amazon, where hunting traditions have remained continuous enough that the knowledge has not been fully lost. Researchers who have spent time with these communities describe the experience of moving through dense forests at night with an experienced hunter as genuinely disorienting, not because the hunter is doing anything supernatural, but because the gap between what he perceives and what the researcher perceives in the same environment at the same moment is so large it is almost difficult to process. Same darkness, same sounds, same smells. Completely different amounts of information being extracted from all of it. The hunter is reading a text. The researcher is looking at marks on a page and not yet knowing the alphabet. What gets lost when knowledge like this disappears is not just technique. It is a relationship with the physical world that took tens of thousands of years to build. The kind of intimacy with a specific landscape, with darkness, with the behavior of animals in the hours when the rest of the world is asleep, that cannot be reconstructed from a book or a documentary or even from spending a weekend camping with a headlamp. It accumulates across generations through direct lived experience in conditions that demand it. And once those conditions are removed, once the electric lights come on and stay on, the knowledge does not get archived somewhere. It dissolves. Quietly, completely, without anyone deciding. That was the trade they were making. So the next time you find yourself in genuine darkness, the kind without a phone screen, or a streetlight bleeding through the curtains, notice what happens in the first few minutes, the slight panic, the immediate reach for light. That response is not hardwired, it is learned. It is the response of a brain. That has been told consistently and from birth that darkness is a problem to be solved, rather than an environment to be inhabited. Your ancestors did not feel that, or rather some of them felt something like it early in life. And then they were taken out into the dark by someone who knew it well, and they learned, and they went back out, and they kept going back, until the darkness stopped being an absence of something, and started being a place with its own texture, and logic and navigable structure. 40,000 years ago, someone lay perfectly still, in complete darkness for an hour, listening to the sound of an animal moving toward water, reading the wind, feeling the temperature drop that comes just before dawn, and waiting for exactly the right moment. Not because he had no other option, because he was exceptionally good at it. That person is your ancestor. That capability is your inheritance. You just have not had much reason to use it lately.